Have you ever driven a car? Then you've broken the law. Have you ever sold anything on eBay? Then you've broken the law. Have you ever shared your Netflix password? Then you've broken the law. Yes, there are a lot of laws in the United States, and every single one of you are dirty, filthy criminals because you have broken the law, and you might not have known it. Studies show that the average American breaks 473 laws every single day. I just made that up, but it's probably close to the truth because there's so many laws in the United States that people just can't help but break the law sometimes. So let's talk about all of the ways that you broke the law but probably didn't even know it. Now, everyone knows that in many jurisdictions it's illegal to gamble, and a lot of people do it anyway, especially with friends. But what about your weekly at-home poker game? Is this really, truly illegal? Well, local laws differ, but generally, if the host accepts money, so-called taking a rake, then yes, this is actually illegal.
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
You're winning, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Everybody out at once.
And often, in many places, in order for a game to be considered gambling, it must involve a prize or consideration, and be determined mostly by chance. If there's no consideration, or the game is deemed a game of skill, then that game will be legal in most jurisdictions. So what is poker? Isn't it arguably a game of skill? Well, defendants have made this argument with limited success. In Colorado back in 2009, Kevin Rayleigh started a poker league where the league kept 10% of the entrance fee for expenses to pay for the dealers who were running the games. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation did an undercover investigation and arrested 5 people for playing Texas Hold'em. Rayleigh was charged with illegal gambling, but a jury acquitted him after a professor testified that poker was a game of skill, not chance. Unfortunately for Rayleigh, the Court of Appeals disagreed that poker was mostly about skill, not chance, and the appeals court ruled that the expert testimony should have been excluded. Now, the Colorado Supreme Court has declined to hear Rayleigh's appeal, but the bottom line is that if your local poker host or dealer is taking some sort of consideration, then that might be an illegal game and you might have broken the law by participating. Now, when you've gone on the internet, have you ever pretended to be something that you aren't? Well, you might have broken the law. Catfishing of the computer kind is defined as the process of luring someone into a relationship by means of a fictional online persona. And if you've ever seen MTV's Catfish, then you know the drill. Someone creates a fictitious online profile, then tricks someone else into falling in love with them.
You can't possibly think it's still Katy Perry.
I do.
Can you just pop his bubble for a second and tell him that he has not been talking to Katy Perry?
The typical catfish situation includes stealing someone else's pictures, often they belong to some unsuspecting model, and texting the target with false promises of everlasting love.
The one problem is he doesn't have a cell phone or a landline or a car or any people who know him besides me.
Now, creating fake online profiles definitely violates the terms and services of most dating and social media sites such as OkCupid and Facebook. But catfishing in and of itself is not necessarily illegal. However, some of the catfish's activities can violate criminal law. If the purpose of the catfishing is to get money and gifts, then this can be prosecuted as fraud. If the catfish uses personal information about their target to get loans or credit cards, this is probably identity theft. If the fake identity is used to lure minors into a relationship, then that act could definitely violate child protection laws. And although breaking US copyright laws won't land you in jail necessarily, using someone else's photographs might be copyright infringement, and the Copyright Act allows the victim to collect actual and statutory damages for that infringement. And if you decided to pass yourself off as a model using images you found on Google, you could get in even bigger trouble because damages for a licensed image could be up to $150,000 per photo, especially if the misrepresentation was willful. So yeah, don't go out there catfishing people, even if you're trying to become the next Chris Hansen.
I'm Chris Hansen. No, you're not. Yes, I am. No, you're not. Yes, I am.
Now, people love tiny houses, but if you're living in a tiny house, you might be breaking the law. Building tiny houses is something of a trend in the US, but these stylish Keebler houses aren't always kosher in the eyes of the law. Now, the Department of Housing and Urban Development's newest regulations give RVs and tiny houses a little more breathing room under the law, but the regs also say that tiny houses which rest on a skid or foundation or are over 400 square feet must meet HUD's manufactured housing standards to be considered legal. That said, whether your tiny home is legal illegal depends almost entirely on how your local area classifies tiny homes. Some cities ban homes under 400 square feet, while others ban them if they are movable. Yes, that's right, lots of cities and states love to fight high housing costs by making it harder to build more housing. But living in a tiny house can also have criminal consequences because a court can conclude that your mobile vehicle isn't a home at all for purposes of the Fourth Amendment. In California versus Carney, the Supreme Court ruled that the warrantless search of a motorhome did not violate the Fourth Amendment's guarantee against warrantless search and seizures. Why? Because the court considered it a vehicle. The Supreme Court has said that the Constitution requires a lesser degree of protection for motor vehicles because they can move quickly before a warrant can be obtained. And in that particular case, the man's motorhome wasn't in a residential area and was licensed as a vehicle. So you might get it both ways. You might be illegally living in a tiny house and also not receive all kinds of constitutional protections afforded for actual houses. Have you ever warmed up your car before driving off? Well, you might have broken the law. If you've ever lived above the Mason-Dixon line, then you're probably familiar with the concept of warming up the car. If the wind chill is hovering around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, then it seems like a pretty good idea to start the car, turn on the heater, and let the car idle for a while before you actually climb in. That way you won't freeze to death. But not so fast. Many states have anti-idling laws. At least 25 states ban idling because it contributes to air pollution. Duh. The American Transportation Research Institute has a full compendium of state and local laws that prohibit idling before you start driving away. And unsurprisingly, the further north you go, the more complicated the laws. In Denver, for instance, you're not supposed to idle the car for more than 5 minutes an hour, which can get you a fine of up to $1,000. But there are exceptions to reflect the cold weather. If the average temperature has been under 20 degrees for 24 hours or it's less than 10 degrees outside, you can heat up your car for as long as you want. Your mileage may vary. Have you ever shared your Netflix password with someone else? Well, then you might have broken the law. Could sharing your Netflix password actually violate federal law? You bet it might possibly theoretically do that. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or CFAA, is a federal law that imposes civil and criminal penalties when a person accesses a computer without authorization or exceeding authorized access. Believe it or not, federal courts cannot agree on whether this means it's against the law for you to share your password. In 2016, a split Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that these words mean that a person cannot access another person's account using that person's password when the person has revoked the first person's access rights. Judge Reinhart, who dissented in that case, warned that a broad interpretation of the CFAA's in excess of authorization prong would, quote, criminalize the ordinary conduct of millions of citizens. And yes, that means you. Other circuits have ruled in similar cases, but there's no consensus view on when a person's use of someone else's password is illegal. The defendant from the Ninth Circuit case asked the Supreme Court to resolve the issue, but the US Solicitor General filed a brief for the government saying that there wasn't really a circuit split and that the issue was narrow, whether someone could continue using a password after the person revoked their permission. The Supreme Court denied cert. So what now? Many commentators have said that the CFAA is way too broad and criminalizes tons and tons of activity that should not be considered illegal. And the Supreme Court has in fact curtailed some of the aspects of the CFAA with respect to police officers and government officials. But the question of sharing your password remains open at this time. So what do you do now? Well, you're gonna have to ask yourself whether watching Bridgerton is worth going to jail over. And then back to gambling, because if you've ever bet on sports, then you might have broken the law. The rules against gambling on sports were relaxed after the Supreme Court's decision in Murphy versus the NCAA. This decision paved the way for states to permit sports betting, but there are still federal laws disallowing sports betting, and this invites all kinds of police overreach. For example, the Illegal Gambling Business Act of 1970 was passed to target organized crime. And under that law, a gambling business is illegal if they exceed over $2,000 of gross revenue in a single day. And this law is broad enough to implicate people who aren't part of any organized crime organization. So if you or your friends violate some local laws against sports gambling and wager more than $2,000 in a single day, the cops can bust you. And in a particularly tragic case, a Virginia detective overheard an optometrist, Sal Culosi, talking about betting on college football games with his friends. The detective then befriended Culosi, eventually convincing him to bet more than $2,000 in a single day. Then the police brought a SWAT team to Culosi's house and killed him in that raid. Have you ever used someone's Wi-Fi without permission? Well, you might have broken the law. Now, not all US jurisdictions make it illegal to steal Wi-Fi, but in Sparta, Michigan, a man was arrested for using a cafe's Wi-Fi to check his email while sitting in his car. The cafe owner didn't know it was illegal, nor did the man, but a cop watched him do this every day and decided it was suspicious. Then he found the law that made, quote, unauthorized computer access a crime. So not only are there issues on a federal level with the CFAA, but there are also all kinds of local laws that might make unauthorized computer access a crime, even if there aren't any victims in stealing that person's Wi-Fi. Have you ever purchased spray paint or markers? Well, you might have broken the law. Some states and cities really hate graffiti, despite the fact that most people who buy spray paint have no intention of breaking the law. The authorities have decided that they need to stop a certain group of people from buying spray paint, and those people are minors. Now, laws banning minors from buying paint and markers originated in the early 1990s when disaffected youth were wearing flannel, listening to Public Enemy and Nirvana, and hanging out around skate parks. Ah, the horror! But young people listening to rap and grunge freaked out city officials around America who were absolutely certain that these minors were defacing public property. Therefore, in California, it's illegal for any person under the age of 18 years to purchase etching cream or an aerosol container of paint that is capable of defacing property. Penalties include up to 100 hours of community service, enforced over a 90-day period. And if you own a business that sells paint, you're also a target of these laws. Quote, every retailer selling or offering for sale in the state etching cream or whatever the hell that is, or aerosol containers of paint capable of defacing property shall post in a conspicuous place a sign in letters at least 3/8 of an inch high stating, quote, any person who maliciously defaces real or personal property with etching cream or paint is guilty of vandalism, which is punishable by a fine, imprisonment, or both. These laws really haven't had much of an impact on the presence of graffiti, and they've been challenged by people impacted by the law. Fashion designer Marc Ecko actually sued New York City on behalf of college and high school students who he claimed had their First Amendment rights infringed upon by the city's law, which banned the purchase of certain materials to people under the age of 21. The Second Circuit ruled that the law was overly broad and restrictive because it barred youths from even possessing markers or spray paint in public or carrying the materials on public transportation or in a school. The law as written hindered young adults' access to materials that they needed for lawful artistic expression. Man, parents, they just don't understand. Now, have you ever sold anything on eBay and not reported your income? If so, you have broken the law. If you sell things online on eBay or Poshmark or Craigslist, you have to report those profits as income on your tax return. Now, the first question you need to answer is whether your eBay habit is a business or a hobby. If you get a steady profit from your sales, the IRS will probably classify this as a business. But if you're only an occasional seller, the IRS considers it a hobby. And in either instance, the income needs to be reported. But if your sales are of a business, then you have the option of deducting more expenses. Though, as usual, when the word IRS is used, please talk to an accountant before you do absolutely anything at all. Have you ever sat down on the sidewalk? Well, then you have probably broken the law. In about 53% of American cities, you've broken an ordinance against sitting or lying down in public. These are known as sit-lie ordinances. It's controversial to ban people from hanging out on a sidewalk. Critics of these laws obviously point out that these are basically designed to attack people experiencing hopelessness and loitering teenagers. But proponents of the laws say that they're about keeping the sidewalks clear so that people can get through. Still, sit down at your own peril. Now, this video isn't over. I cover a bunch more ways that you broke the law over on Nebula, which you can now get with a huge discount when you get it with today's sponsor, CuriosityStream. Loud pets, simply walking across the street. If you play a movie or TV show in public, because sometimes going into detail about every way that you ever broke the law doesn't work on YouTube, which is why my creator friends and I teamed up to build our own platform where creators don't need to worry about demonetization or the dreaded algorithm. It's called Nebula, and we're thrilled to be partnering with CuriosityStream. Not only are our Nebula versions ad-free and extended, but they also get released early before the YouTube versions, because Nebula is a place where we can experiment with content and put things out that we couldn't put on YouTube, and it features lots of YouTube's top educational ish creators like MKBHD, PhilosophyTube, and Extra Credits. And we're thrilled to be partnering with CuriosityStream because they are the go-to source for the best documentaries and long-form educational content on the internet. They even have an entire section devoted to unsolved mysteries and crime. So if you like my videos, you will love the stuff on CuriosityStream. And we worked out a deal where if you sign up for CuriosityStream with the link in the description, you'll also get a Nebula subscription for free. And to be clear, that Nebula subscription is not a trial, it's free for as long as you're a CuriosityStream member. And right now, CuriosityStream is offering 26% off their annual plans. That's less than $15 for the entire year for both CuriosityStream and Nebula. So if you click on the link that's on screen right now, you'll get CuriosityStream and Nebula for 26% off. Or you can go to curiositystream.com/legaleagle. It's a great way to support this channel and educational content directly for under $15 per year. So just click on this link. Plus, clicking on this link really helps out this channel. And while you're at it, click on this playlist for all of my other legal entertainment videos, or I'll see you in court.